our next speaker joins us from ServiceNow. ServiceNow is a cloud-based workflow automation platform that enables enterprise organizations to improve operational efficiencies by streamlining and automating routine tasks. With roots in IT service management, ServiceNow has evolved to become the enterprise service management platform for organizations utilizing all business functions from customer service to HR to security and more. Today's presenter is Chief Transformation Officer of ServiceNow. Today he'll be presenting with Debbie Francel. Yes! Enterprise Service Management with Low-Code Technologies. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the Chief Transformation Officer of ServiceNow, Tom Parisi, and Debbie Francel.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Today we'll talk about what I think is a really exciting topic, which is the concept of enterprise service management and what often becomes quickly global business services. And as a former practitioner of digital transformation, I find this to be one of the most exciting elements of the overall IT journey, right? ESM, GBS, that's where you're starting to really take some back-end processes, some of the back office, and translating it into an experience and creating new channels for your audience. And there's a really big opportunity to drive a range of outcomes, innovating the way work is done, elevating the experience for all the parties involved, whether that's the requester or the fulfiller, aligning the people, processes, and technology. As IT practitioners, we've made a lot of investments in a variety of different technologies. And how do we start to bring those all together to where we're actually running the business in a cohesive way? Improving service quality. And I think actually one of the funnest things that kind of starts to bubble up out of this is beginning to unite stakeholders. It's no longer a single commodity IT function you're really dealing with. You're talking about moving work across the enterprise, or you're talking about hiding organization and technical complexity from your audience. And so it's a great opportunity for IT to start engaging the business differently and really being the facilitator of connections. One of the big demands in IT this day is to start advising the business and leading the business on a journey. We're no longer just service providers. And I think GBS and ESM are a great way to really kind of initiate that type of leadership role for IT and drive the business to new heights on many levels. What we'll talk about today are kind of three elements that are very common in an ESM GBS transformation. We'll talk a little bit about some of the ServiceNow capabilities that enable that, but we'll also spend some time talking about the different organization and cultural benefits that come out of that. So the first element of getting ESM and GBS right is really starting to connect all of these technologies across the enterprise. In a typical environment, we're asking the audience to go to a bunch of disparate locations that are dependent on where the data is stored or which department is managing that service. And so our users end up going to a variety of different locations, having a bunch of different experiences, and really inheriting all of the complexity from us. So how can we start to begin to reduce the cognitive overhead on the user base? Is separate their experience from how the technology and the puzzle of complexity is happening on the back end. And this is a key part of the ServiceNow strategy, is basically creating that separation between the experience and everything that needs to happen. So if you take a typical process that's happening in an enterprise, whether that's something that is traditionally considered a single department like HR onboarding, or whether that's the way an invoicing process or a requisition process is completed, it involves a bunch of different systems of record and a bunch of different locations and a bunch of different approval steps. So one element is really bringing that logical collection of disparate transactions and creating a tangible workflow out of it. And so this is where we see great power in really starting to unite your IT organization. IT organizations are often separated by department. I'm supporting the finance department. I'm supporting the HR department. In this type of approach, we start to bring those different organizations together on behalf of the user and behalf of the way the work needs to happen across the enterprise. So this technique of creating kind of a living, breathing system of record for work or task or business processes is how we really go about kind of creating shared visibility, the ability to measure, the ability to process mine and improve over time. So that's a key element to kind of getting the technology foundation right. But every transformation really manifests itself through experience. And so there's a critical element to, beyond just the workflow, how do you land that new experience in a way that's easy and digestible and consumer grade for your audience? And so, again, thinking from a ServiceNow perspective, we're very focused on that experience layer and making it be where the user is at. Trying to break this old paradigm of the user needs to come here because that's where the data is stored. So there's some elements of our platform that are very focused on experience around intranet sites or a unified portal or shared support centers. But there's also a critical need to land that into other locations that might be important to your audience. So for example, if you have a factory floor worker who's using an application, how do you land the support within that application? How do you put support in the hands of that audience rather than kind of saying you need to go elsewhere to drive your request for support? Specialty dashboards. We talked about visibility of work. In the past, again, when work processes were just a collection of different disparate transactions, it was hard to really get a read on where's the work happening and what's going. Specialty dashboards allows different audiences to see that work in the lens they need to. So again, going back to an onboarding example, a supervisor might have new joiners who are about to arrive, people have recently arrived, and some people who are leaving. Those are all different workflows, but to the supervisor, that's kind of one focus area. How are my people transitioning and how is that going? But to the person going through the onboarding, they're looking for a completely different experience. They're not worried about whether their data in the HR system has been updated yet. They're worried about when is their laptop going to be there. How are they getting integrated into their new teams? What's the company culture like? Where's their badging and how are they going to have access on day one? So again, the ability to kind of land the experience in a way that's designed around your audience rather than making your audience accommodate what you've presented. But it's not just about our platform. There's a lot of users who are going to be in other platforms as well. So for example, Microsoft Teams is a very common platform in enterprises, right? We don't want to say to an audience, if you have a function that's in ServiceNow, go to the ServiceNow site. Otherwise, you can work in Teams. So part of our experience strategy is to land, again, where the user's at. So we have a heavy integration with Microsoft Teams where you have that ability to kind of, through Teams, see the visibility of support within ServiceNow or drive actions, requests, experience into ServiceNow. And the same principle applies to mobile. We have a mobile platform that lands all this elegantly in the concept of an app. But if you have a proprietary app, the last thing we want to say to you is your employees have to absorb another app because you've decided to use ServiceNow. So we can land the ServiceNow capabilities within that proprietary app. So it's really that principle of making the experience match the intended desire of your audience rather than making them absorb all of the pain and complexity of the technical environment that we're operating in. And then the third and kind of key final moment I think that really is exciting about ESM and GBS transformations is changing that relationship with the business and IT. We all know that in IT, we're often the organization that has to provide something for the business and then operate it. So we end up, for each new service we offer, we end up with an extended operating tail. Well, what if you could take that process and put it into the hands of your audience, your line of business, without absorbing the traditional risk, or without losing visibility, or without ending up with data being taken out of the system? That's really a third element of the ServiceNow platform, is taking our overall platform and making it available in a governed way for your pro-code developers or your low-code department enablers. And so you see the scenario can range from someone in marketing taking an existing process that might be done through a shared mailbox or a SharePoint site or an Excel spreadsheet and starting to turn that into a real experience backed by a tangible workflow, something that allows the work to move through the enterprise, but it doesn't create risk. And there's different flavors of that. We see organizations that they'll have the IT organization create a workflow and then hand it off to the business department so that the business department can take ownership of that process. And they can own the business rules, and they can add approval steps, and they become kind of the stewards of their own work. And so there's really a very exciting foundation here where, by using the platform and exposing some of the capabilities, you're really kind of bringing the business and IT departments closer together. You're avoiding scenarios where the IT capacity becomes the bottleneck for every activity that needs to be done. And as a former practitioner, my favorite part is you prevent this scenario of you have to operate and maintain everything you build. You're able to place business processes in the hands of that business department so that they can control it. So those are three elements of the ESM GBS transformation that I think really become exciting because they represent a new way for organizations to work, to really bring workflows to a tangible, measurable, visible outcome. I'm going to quickly just talk a little bit about how that's done, but this will be as technical as we get, and then we'll talk about some business examples and how we see it applied. But to give a quick overview of the ServiceNow platform, there's really kind of 6 main components. Everything is built on the Now platform. The Now platform was originally built in the cloud, and it was originally designed as a way of moving work across the enterprise. So it was invented by Fred Luddy, who basically was in a corporate bureaucracy environment, saw where work was getting held up, saw the pain of moving things across the enterprise, and said, what if I can make something that would take that pain away? That's really where we started. What quickly became clear is there was an appetite for, that's a great concept, but show me something you can build with it. And that's what really led into our foray of IT. And there's often a perception that ServiceNow is an IT ticketing tool. You'll hear about ServiceNow tickets, right? That's very near and dear to our foundation. But what's really enabled the growth of the impact of the platform is that original paradigm, that original development concept of what if you could define work and move it wherever it needed to be and have visibility to it and have measurement around it. And so that's led into other areas. As I mentioned, we started in IT and really started to build out a bunch of robust capabilities. But as the platform got in the hands of some of our innovative customers, they started to apply it in a really kind of unique way, different than ServiceNow itself had actually intended. And they started to drive some employee processes. And they said, well, if you can have an IT service management process, why don't I just cross out the IT and make it an enterprise service management process? And I'll build my own. And I'll start learning how to kind of route service through the enterprise. And I could do that for legal. I could do that for facilities ticket. And so we really started to see as a company, organizations taking our platform and innovating with it. That then started to also get applied to customer scenarios where organizations would say, well, I have this service management process. Why can't the input be a consumer or one of my supply chain partners? All I'm going to do is bring that service in and route it and measure it and need visibility to it and have the ability to turn it around. So those three elements really started to drive the extension and innovation around the ServiceNow platform. And then there became a big moment where we started to say, well, the way the organizations are doing that is through our App Engine. They're using our own development platform that we've exposed to do innovation on their own. That's great, but what if we could help them? What if we could make that exposure of the development platform be a little more controlled, have a little more visibility, protect data, avoid this challenge of shadow IT and sprawl? And so the creator workflows kind of became that fourth area of focus, which is how do I make the development platform be available, but not introduce all the risk that goes with a low-code through pro-code type framework. And then the final area that we've really focused on recently is industry workflows. So again, you can imagine that paradigm of innovation where customers started to say, if I can do these workflows, why don't I start connecting different departments together, different suppliers together? Why don't I connect with my customer directly? And we started to get into all of these unique industry solutions. So when we talk about the ServiceNow platform, this is kind of a cheat sheet to that. These different ways of purpose-built, pre-built capabilities that are designed in a way that you can also extend without breaking the upgrade path, without creating shadow IT, without creating tech debt that we know in IT can last for years. And so that's kind of ServiceNow in a nutshell and how we really drive that ESM GBS transformation. And again, why I think that's so powerful is it's that moment in time where the business departments or the lines of business know they need help and they're kind of turning to IT and say, do you have any advice for me? Do you have any suggestions on how I might be able to pull this off? And so it's really a great way of tapping into that energy of customers that want to work differently, of organizations that are hungry for change, being able to drive that forward. So I'd like to bring up now Debbie Francel. Debbie Francel is, like me, a practitioner, but from the business side. We've talked about ESM and GBS really ends up being this tight kind of camaraderie and relationship between the business and IT. And so I thought it would be fun for us together talk through some of the examples and answer some questions you might have on how these business processes come to life. But Debbie, maybe a quick intro and your perspective.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. So hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Francel, as Tom said. Been with ServiceNow about 5 years, and I spent the majority of my time in my career working from the service delivery perspective. And as I've spent that time, what we've seen change is that in the past, service delivery organizations were very much the wrench turners, right? Providing that service to employees, answering their questions, and getting them out the door quickly. And what we've seen change quite significantly in the past couple of years is really what this slide says here. Service delivery organizations, and especially GBS organizations, have changed in that they've really acquired a seat at the table and enabled business outcomes and really driven business outcomes. And GBS especially, and technology has certainly enabled them to do so, GBS organizations have really been driving business outcomes. So not only have they been transacting business and working together to solve business problems, but they've truly been able to drive outcomes by solving the problems and working together to solve the problems for employees and making them more efficient and effective for the organizations that they support. So maybe we can go ahead and talk about what some of those business problems are. We've been talking with a few of you in this room today and others about how do you get started? How do you figure out what are those right business processes? As Tom just did a good job of articulating, Technology can certainly support those business processes and support people to solve those problems, but as you can see here, there are a wide variety of places that you can start. Is it legal? Is it procurement? Is it HR? Is it facilities? And the answer is it really can be anything. You just need to, in your organization, figure out where do we have a problem that we need to solve, and then go ahead and get started. And truly, it's understanding what are those processes that employees are struggling with, and how can we work together and use technology to understand those problems and just go ahead and get started. So some of that is working together, figuring out what are those things that employees are calling us, asking us about, and how can we actually figure out how to reimagine those processes and tie those things together to better understand and solve those problems for our employees. Some of those things are listed here, and I'm sure some of these are near and dear to all of your hearts. Maybe we can talk through just a couple of what those examples are that we've worked on. Leave of absence is something that comes to mind for me, and Tom talked through onboarding just a few minutes ago, but when you think about something complex like leave of absence, when individuals take a leave of absence in an organization, it's usually because something is happening to them personally. Maybe they're having a baby, they're sick, someone in their life is sick, and so they're typically going to be worried about that personal issue, that health concern, et cetera. But that's going to have a very real impact to them at work, maybe to their manager, to their team. Maybe they are a manager and they're leaving a team behind when they're going out on that leave of absence. And when you think about that, sometimes in the past, leave of absence has seemed like an HR issue, but it's really not. That person who's going out is needing to have their building access turned off, their security access turned off. They need to have their team reassigned. They need to make sure that their leave is actually submitted appropriately, that they're being given the right information to benefits, that their pay is going to be handled appropriately. So a lot of different impacts for that one individual, and that the right notifications are sent out and managed appropriately across the organization. Maybe there are third parties involved because the benefits provider isn't handled in-house. The carrier for that leave is somebody external. If you handle that appropriately, that workflow can be managed across the organization, and that process can be handled more seamlessly, and the employee, him or herself, just has one place to go and doesn't need to think about all of those underlying impacts. So just one example that can be handled and streamlined so that the employee can actually worry about what's happening to them or be excited about going out and having a baby and not think about all of those underlying impacts. Maybe we can move forward.
Well said, Debbie. And I think, again, one of the things that we maybe picked up on is this excitement around, this is where you start to see a little bit more art than science in the IT organization, right? Some of these are pre-built, purpose-built ServiceNow workflows, and you just kind of pull them in and get them and configure them, and they're your own. But you'll see scenarios on here that are just kind of what we've seen some organizations do around ESM and GBS to kind of match their own particular needs. As an example of an internal story at ServiceNow, we were having a challenge with kind of our patent application process. The developers didn't care about the patent application. That was not kind of what they were focused on. And so we built a simple patent application process that would allow the developer to initiate it from where they were working and start the process and have that visibility, right? So that simple workflow was not heavy investment. It wasn't heavy innovation. It was just a simple application to a clear problem, increased our patent application sixfold, simply by making a process more accessible to the audience. We see similar examples in experience around, let's say you have that a retail workforce, and let's say they're on their way to work, and let's say they get in a car accident, right? And they're going to be late, right? A typical process is either not to hear from them or be asking them to text or get a hold of a store manager, right? We've seen organizations create a simple workflow experience in the mobile app that says, notify my manager that I'm going to be late. How late are you going to be? Do you need help? Right? So it creates this opportunity to not just deliver these corporate processes and requests that are definitely important. It allows some of that artistic balance around how can I connect with my audience better? What are some other things I can do? How can I take some of these virtual activities and start to bring some structure and experience to them? So I love your onboard or your LOA example because it hits a lot of elements of that. It's not just about what's the date and when do we need to change your status fields in a system. It's how can we support you through this process? How can we remind you of some things you might want to do before you leave, like update your people profile to let other people know you're going to be out? Little simple things like that. So I know, Debbie, you were saying let's move on to an example. And we're also happy at this time to take any questions, but otherwise we'll also talk through some additional examples. But please don't hesitate if there's any area we could talk about in particular.
I think one thing that I wanted to mention as well, and I mentioned in my background, I come from the service delivery world, and I think I said to one of you in the room earlier, programming my DVR is a technical feat for me at the end of the day. So technology is not really my background by nature. I'm more about the people side of it, helping organizations to be successful with how they're structured, how they actually adopt technology. But you can make technology so easy that the practitioner can actually deliver services to their organization, him or herself. So if they see that someone's struggling or there's a new policy that needs to be rolled out to a specific group that they're supporting, something new is happening as a new policy is being rolled out, they need to make sure that somebody understands a new policy as they're returning to the office, or new training needs to be delivered quite quickly. You can put technology in the hands of a manager at a factory, as Tom was mentioning earlier, and they can actually deliver that without needing to rely on the valuable IT resources that may need to be rolling out new, larger technology programs so that content can be delivered in a more personalized way from the practitioners. And I think that's really the beauty of how technology has really innovated over the last several years. Any questions from the group at this point? We have just a few minutes left.
You mentioned like Microsoft Teams integration and that type of stuff. What are some examples of things you've done in the past from the integration perspective to bring that integration together?
Yeah, so Microsoft Teams, it's kind of a dual integration. So ServiceNow can actually either be integrated in with Teams or Teams integrated in with ServiceNow. So for organizations that are heavy Teams users, you can actually see who's active in Teams, is somebody available. So for example, if organizations are leveraging Teams, you can see within our chat application, is somebody available in Teams right now before you actually start chatting with them from a service center perspective and that sort of thing. So it's really a dual-way integration.
Yeah, and there's a couple other examples where you can, let's say you've got a ServiceNow portal and you also got users who are working in Office, right, as they're starting to ask questions in Teams about, well, what's the status of that ticket I have open, or how would I go about doing this? Right, that ability to have that experience of ServiceNow support be landed directly within Teams without changing their paradigm. We've also done some things that try and reflect how organizations work. This is not so much ESM and GBS, but on the Teams paradigm, major incident management. One of the activities that you do there is end up starting a chat, and then you're maintaining that, right? Actually pulling that into kind of a dashboard that doesn't just bring in the chat, but it brings in some information about the instrumentation, about some different protocols that are available, some communications. So you're having a major incident management, but you're really pulling together the whole ecosystem rather than asking people to have all these different windows open or work in different ways. So it's sometimes a technical integration, sometimes it's more of a thematic. How do organizations that have multiple platforms solve that puzzle of the platforms in a clean, efficient way? Sure. All right, and then I think, Debbie, we can highlight here a couple things. So we talked about kind of an evolution, right? And so here we're just showing a few illustrations of where that's gone. We talked about HR was one of the quick jumps out of IT. That's where we saw a lot of our companies go to first. The second most number of tickets in the shop are coming out of HR. So once there was great success with IT, it's I'm going to get rid of those HR tickets, start to automate, uplift the experience. And then that started to lead into similar scenarios like legal and workplace. But legal is a good example. You have, let's say, an employee issue happening, legal matters, right? In that scenario, you're dealing with IT, HR, a supervisor, facilities, legal, right? All of those groups are coming together. And so you see scenarios like that. And then one of the more recent elements we've started to see is organizations using ServiceNow to wrap some of their ERP workflows. So something like procurement, where you have several market-leading systems of record and capability structures, right? But that's still a hard interface for certain audiences to use, or there's some complexity in the process that those particular platforms might not be strong at in terms of workflow or in terms of some of the custom processes that an organization might need. Procurement case management is an example of kind of where we've started to say, hey, we can protect some of the indirect users of ERPs from the complicated interface and connect some of these processes together in a way that we're starting to, again, simplify the experience, take away training in terms of deployment, really kind of creating that much more intuitive, easily deployable app strategy.
How are we doing on time? I know we started the clock a little bit late, so it was started a little late. So we're good? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Yeah. Any other questions before we move on? Great.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
I'm going to cut us off right there.